Hey, you're listening to Abyss Gazing, where we celebrate all things spooky and mental health.
I'm your co-host Mark,
And I'm your co-host, Josh.
and we're talking about Popcorn Frights Fright Festival.
Yes. So Popcorn Frights is a film festival out of Florida that uh does and specializes in independent cinema, and they had a big 3D boom with their stuff this year. So they showed a 50th anniversary of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It showed Jaws 3D. They showed Friday the 13th 3D. So they had a big 3D theme this year, but we're talking about nine of the independent films for this episode.
Yeah, it was. We had some good stuff. We had some what the hell stuff, and everything just about in between.
Yeah, I will say this was our first time covering this festival, and we did this back to back with Fantasia Fest. And this was, like you said, like there is kind of like it's like a mixed bag, but it's definitely you have moments that are kind of just like very bizarre, kind of very like, what am I watching right now?
There were some that were surprising. Uh, there was one letdown, and that's probably because I was looking forward to it way too much. Uh,
I'm sorry.
yeah,
Yeah, so there's eight of these, eight out of nine of these we both watched, and Mark, you're gonna kick us off with the one that I did not get a chance to watch, and that is Invoking Yell, because my link expired before I could watch it.
so Invoking Yell is a found footage, and I like a lot of found footage stuff. And the concept of this was a black metal band performing a ritual to try to become big. That was the concept behind it. And I had seen trailers and read about it. So when I saw that we could get a screener for it, I was a bit probably too excited for it. Um, I mean, some people are going to like it. The idea's there, the concept's there. It was the execution that didn't quite pull it off. It ended up being a combination of found footage and slow burn, which a lot of found footage to begin with can be a tendency to be a little slow. So, is it a bad movie? Not necessarily. I think it's a case of high expectations that I ended up being let down a little bit.
The concept, from what you sound, kind of reminds me a little bit about like Jennifer's Body. And I really wish I would have been able to watch this, because I am trying to slowly get more into found footage. I feel like being friends with you has like helped me get into found footage more. But
Well,
there are
I found a
definitely,
couple. I found a couple that you've liked.
yes, you have. And there are definitely ones that, like, you showed me Hell House LLC, and I was not a fan of that. Like,
I love Hell House.
eh, which is which is say something, because it's one of the most like beloved found footage movies of the new millennium. And I just it
And
wasn't it just wasn't for me.
I think Screambox has the director's cut. So
Yeah.
I need if it does, I need to go watch that because I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah. All right. So on Rorschach rating scale, what would you give Invoking Yale?
A 2.5, right in the middle. It
Ooh.
was okay. It wasn't shitty, but it wasn't great. And it might have to do with having high hopes going into it.
This is part of the reason I like doing like film festivals like this, is because I don't have any expectations nine times out of ten. Like, I am, like you mentioned, like a film that like really surprised you. And there's a film on this list of films we're going to talk about today that like really surprised the mess out of me. Like I was not expecting to love it as much as I did. There's actually a couple of films in this movie, in this episode we'll talk about that I was really surprised by. But for the most part, like we basically like went through the website, read brief descriptions, and just was like, these are the ones we want to cover. And
Yeah,
some of these are
and
my movies, some of these are yours.
and this one, it's almost like it was somebody's idea of what a black metal band is supposed to be, as opposed to what an actual black metal band is. And that was part of what kind of killed the movie for me. It seemed like somebody was pretending to be black metal band members as opposed to actually being black metal band members, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does. And again, I really wish I would have gotten a chance to watch this. My plan was to actually watch it before we recorded today, and again, technical difficulties. Um, but yeah, I'm excited to start talking about some of these movies, so let's jump into it. What is the first movie you'd like you would like to cover? Is there like an order you want to go into, or you just
Um, Whichever. I mean, we've got enough movies to talk about.
All right. So, the first movie we'll talk about, we watched jointly together, is a movie called Sorry, Charlie. This movie tells the story of a woman who is sexually assaulted and as a result becomes pregnant and has a growing fear while living alone. And it's kind of like an exploration of the psychological toll. And I am curious to hear what you have to say about this because this was a movie that I picked, and this is definitely more of my thing because I like a lot of these like more deeper, richer thematic movies, especially when it comes to mental health and doing what we do here. So like I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Uh yeah, this was one of your picks, wasn't it? That explains a lot. Um it's it was all right. It kind of drug on. It was a bit predictable, quite a bit predictable. Um Apparently I've seen too much horror in my lifetime because it was a case of I pretty much figured out what was happening within about the first 10 or 15 minutes. I knew what was getting ready to happen and how it was going to go down. And I was right.
I I feel like so some of what you say I agree with. I agree that so this movie's only 75 minutes. And for a movie
It
that is
felt like two
only,
hours.
yeah, for a movie that's only 75 minutes, there is a lot of dead time. Like for as much as I genuinely had a good time with this movie, it felt like it just drug on. But those moments where it drags, it like drags and it
It
just feels like
almost
nails on the chalkboard.
it almost would have been better as a short.
I think it would have worked better as a short, but not necessarily as like a short that's like 5-10 minutes. I think this would have worked really strongly as like a 20-minute short, like a short film that has a little bit of length to it. I was really captivated by Kathleen Kenny, who is our lead actress in this movie. I thought she did a great job. And while I will say like 95 of this percent of this movie is predictable, the climax got me. And
Oh no, I saw that coming from a mile
no,
away.
no, it got me. And like that's the thing that like I like about movies like this is like I am not trying to predict what is going to happen next. I am like completely shutting off my brain and saying, all right, I want this to like move me either in a negative way or in a positive way. And I just kind of turn off all my expectations. It's part of the reason that I go back to my statement that I made at the beginning of the podcast. It's the reason I like doing film festivals is because I don't have any expectations. Try not to read into uh films like this. And I think it's more effective for me as a viewer in the long run. So like I really dug the ending of this movie. I thought that it took me off guard, it surprised me. But you also have to say like the character design of this villain, incredible.
Really? You thought so?
I liked the character design of this guy, man. I thought the top hat and the skull mask, I thought it
I
worked.
I felt like this was a okay, you can copy my homework, but don't make it obvious version of Jack Skellington.
What I'm like trying to remember what they actually called him in this movie. Um, I have the oh, there is no notes here. I actually don't know.
Like, I
Don't remember.
don't know.
It's like the gentleman, I think is the guy's name. Um, but
That
yeah,
almost sounds like they were trying to go with the whole it's the shape concept.
kind of. And like you don't really see they kind of like portray him in that way for like maybe like 85% of the movie where you don't really see him until the climax. And I am like kind of curious, like in legitimacy, like legitimately curious if this is in fact based on a true story, like if there was like a killer that like lured women out to assault them by the sound of a crying baby.
I mean, I could get into my weird cryptic shit with you on that one. There's or some forms of mountain lion sound like crying babies sometimes.
There's a
Um,
yeah, because there's a moment in the film where she's like talking to the her therapist and she's like, yeah, like she says that there's like she drops an animal, and I don't remember exactly what animal it is, but she's like,
Probably a bobcat.
uh no, it was like an actual like domestic animal.
Oh,
Wasn't like an international.
feral cats will sound like that. You ever heard of feral cat fighting or getting
Yes,
ready to?
that's what it was. It was a feral cat because she had her look it up on YouTube. He's
Yeah,
like, see, look, and
yeah, bobcats and like cougars and mountain lions will sound like that too, or sound like women screaming.
I think Sorry Charlie has a good hook to it. But like you said, like it's predictable. It has those dead moments. For a film that is 75 minutes, it shouldn't feel like it drags the way that it does.
The problem I have when a movie gets to dragging too much, um, my brain is always going at like 100 miles an hour normally.
Yeah.
So as long as a movie can keep me engaged, I'm good. But when it starts to drag, is when like things kick into gear and like the nitrous kicks in and I start figuring it out within a matter of minutes. And that's what happened with this one.
I know that there are going to be worse films we're going to be talk about tonight. And when I say worse, I'm not talking about quality, but more along the lines of preference. As we've established between Mark in the past, go check out our Sweeney Todd episode.
Oh God.
And all right, so this one on the Rorschach rating scale, what would you give this one?
I might have liked it yet less than Invoking Yell. So I'll probably give it like two. It's not good.
I will go ahead and say I will go ahead and give this one a 3 out of 5. I think
Three
this
out of
movie
five.
3 out of 5. I liked it a little bit better. I think it doesn't quite stick the landing. It has really decent ideas, but again, it doesn't have the best execution of those. And given its really short runtime, I feel like I expected a little bit more from this.
I found it slow, predictable, and uninteresting in almost every way. And I found the villain to be a cheap knockoff of Jack Skellington, or at least in design.
that is fine. But it, to each their own. And everyone has a different experience, especially when you open up our next film, Puzzle Box,
I have a
which
feeling. I have a feeling you may not have understood this one.
I am open to interpretation. So, Puzzle Box tells the story of a drug addict named Kate who basically goes to a house in the woods with her sister Olivia in order to kind of go through rehabilitation and document everything. And things kind of take a little bit of a David Lynch-esque twist as the surrounding areas of where they are doing said rehabilitation start to actually shift
So
around.
I felt like the story is a minor kind of copy or ripoff of the Evil Dead remake. It's the same concept,
It is.
almost exactly.
Yeah.
And two, um, there's really only two characters in the whole movie,
Yep.
including the villains. There's still only two characters in the movie.
Yep.
Okay, you
No,
picked up on that?
I did. I got this one. This one out of all the movies we are covering on this episode, this is the one that felt like the biggest missed opportunity. Like you're
Now,
right.
I don't think so because it's a movie about rehabilitation
Hmm.
and it tends to be a cycle and a lot of people repeat that cycle. And what you were seeing in the movie was cycles of the same thing happening over and over and over again. So it was kind of, to me, came across as a metaphor for the recovery cycle that a lot of people go through.
All right. I will give you that. I had not considered that. And I think I
Haha,
have a
told
little
you.
bit, just a little bit more respect for this one. But I think the reason that like it felt like a missed opportunity for me is that we brought up the Evil Dead. Go check out our Evil Dead 2013 episode.
if
But
it
one of the
wasn't
things
if it wasn't so close in story, I even looked over at Kate and was like, it's almost the exact same story,
I think what
just
what
in
kills it,
found footage.
yeah, what kills it for me is not found footage, is that with the Evil Dead, I think that's a great example. I felt like I had, because I've had friends go through stories very similar to Jane, the
Kate,
main, is it, is that
you
her
said it
name?
was Kate at the beginning. You
Now I'm
said her
like,
you said her name was Kate or Katie or something like that.
um yeah, so no, Kate is her, but I'm talking about Evil Dead. So
Oh, okay.
main character's name is Kate. In the Evil Dead, Jane Levy's character, Mia,
Yeah.
goes through that whole um process of rehabilitation. I I think that's a great example. But the thing that I talked about in that episode is that I've had friends that are like Kate and Mia, and watching someone you care about go through the rehabilitation process is one of the hardest things I feel like I've ever experienced emotionally, and it's very draining. But I felt like the thing that Evil Dead got right was that I felt like I could emotionally connect to Mia and to the characters in that movie, and I didn't feel that here. I think this is why I say this feels like a missed opportunity for what could have been greatness, regardless of how close it is in narrative to the Evil Dead remake.
Um, yeah, it had too much resemblance in the story and the way they were doing it. Um, so if you've seen the Evil Dead remake, it kind of like first thing I said, it was pretty much just a retelling in some extent, to some extent, with a twist, so to speak. But what?
I was just gonna say with a twist.
With a twist.
Air quotes.
So I mean, it's as a found footage, it was good. as a story, it wasn't really original at all, but it was still pretty cool. It had some of the same kind of sequences as Outwater had.
It
Um,
did.
and the I picked up on why it's called Puzzle Box because if you paid attention, there was times she'd go through one door and she'd turn and go back through it. It would be a completely different room.
Yeah.
So everything was shifting around as she was going through doors.
Which so those are the elements that I think this movie does really strong. I think the kind of more psychedelic elements or like quote unquote mind bending work here, but there's not enough of it. Like they don't really embrace the puzzle aspect of it until like way more into like halfway through the film, if not even the third act.
Yeah, they and really the name of the movie kind of refers to that and the puzzle of working out your own recovery too.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a dual meaning name with the movie. So like I said, it wasn't bad. As a found footage, it was on the better side of found footage. It just it had too much in common story wise with Evil Dead is what my issue was.
See, to me, I felt like this was like another forgettable found footage. And maybe again, that's my preference when it comes to films, and I'm not looking at this objectively, but I had there's really no character development in here. There's no real emotional connection. Like a little bit of like it's a twistier moment, so to say, is really the strength of this movie. But like I really think that had this movie had maybe like an additional like 10 to 15 minutes to kind of flesh out some of these issues, I would have felt like immensely different than I do right now.
Yeah, it seemed like it was a little rushed to get to the horror. Like they rushed to get to that point. They show them arguing and fighting, but they don't really do anything to build the characters. They just rush into the nightmare or whatever you want to call it.
Which which is really where it like started losing me as a viewer. Like I felt like the first act when they're like on the way to the cabin, I was like, okay, this is kind of interesting. And then once you kind of go into the night vision portion of this movie, it just becomes just really bad. Is that's kind of where everything kind of starts to unravel.
But if it is a metaphor for like dealing with recovery, when you're coming off of some of those drugs, it gets really bad.
Now, I think as a metaphor for like recovery and that whole entire process, I think this movie has strength in that fact. But if you don't know anybody that has ever been in that community, has ever gone through that process or experienced any of that heartache, you're not going to connect with these characters. It's literally just going to be another found footage movie that has some cool horror elements into it.
Yeah,
So, all right, this one on the Rorschach rating scale, what do you give it?
three.
Oh, how the turntables, my friend. I'm gonna go ahead and give this one a 1 out of 5. I guarantee it may not be the lowest on this one, but this one hurt me the most. I
It
will say
hurts you
that.
the most.
It hurt me the most, man. I was expecting a lot from this one. And it just kind of, nope.
Yeah, because they talked about it. It apparently got a lot of praise from other festivals and stuff.
I'm glad that there's an audience out there for it. It just didn't connect with me. And said when I talked about Sorry Charlie, I love movies that have a deep like are deeply rooted in thematic elements like that are addressing mental health, addiction, depression. I love movies like that because I'm really passionate about it. Obviously, I run, a I I founded a nonprofit discussing that stuff. I run a podcast with you about it. So like this movie like had all of the makings of what should have been a remarkable found footage film, and it couldn't connect for me. All right, and next up is probably the strangest one on this list,
Was it
and
Abruptio?
a, a let's say Abruptio. This movie, I don't even know how to describe this movie. It's like the only one on this list where I'm just like, this was
It was
strange.
like if somebody was a fan of Team America and horror and decided to put it together.
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text help to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below, wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.
Kind of. All right. So basically it tells the story of, we'll get into why he talked about Team America, but basically this is a movie that tells the story of a man who wakes up with a bomb implanted into his neck, and basically he's made to do a whole bunch of really sketchy stuff in order to like not have the bomb go off. And even that description of this narrative is super vague, because honestly, I feel like the less you know about this movie, the better it is.
And puppets.
Yeah, so let's talk.
But it's not actually puppets. That's what's weird. Is it's like people with puppet heads.
Yeah, so this movie, when I say that this is probably one of the most unique viewing experiences you'll have, it is 100% correct. Like, Mark, I think you hit it on the head where you talked about like it's people's bodies, but yet they have like puppet like but
Faces and
their
heads.
faces, but even the faces, like they're still look kind of like a cross between like Muppets.
It's like a silicone mask, so it's very fleshy looking, but
It's
it's
so
just quite
weird.
off. It's just a touch off. So it's like, what the hell? The hell is that? And it was
Yeah,
bloody.
when I talk about like surprises in this festival, this was the one that like floored me. Like I have a couple favorites out of this one, and this is one of them. I I freaking loved this movie. It is weird, the bizarre, like the The narrative is just downright bizarre. It feels like it takes elements from the Suicide Squad, uh Team America, World Police, Office Space, Saw. Like it just, and even that like just does only scratch the surface of like how unique this movie is.
Yeah, it's out there. It's just an insane movie all the way around. I really don't know how to describe it too well.
And I mean, like this is the last movie that Sid Haig ever did. I don't know if
That's
you knew that.
who?
Sid Haig, Captain Spaulding.
Oh, he was one of the voices in this.
So he is. I mean, like this isn't an all-star cast. Like, so if you're a Buffy fan, James
Oh wow.
Marster is in this. Sid Haig, Christopher McDonald, Robert England, um, Patrick Kavanaugh, Rick Flower or Foucher. I mean, just that Jordan Peele's in this movie. Like, um, uh, there's I'm trying to remember the chick's name from she was, speaking of the Suicide Squad, she was Katana in the first one. But yeah, dude, this cast is like absolutely insane. Nope, I lied. It was not that. It's Hannah May Lee. For some reason, I am getting my movies mixed up. This
Uh,
movie is just absolutely. I don't even know like where to begin, like with this movie. Like where do you stand with it? Like you give me your feelings and I'll build off of that.
it's one I need to watch again for multiple reasons, unfortunately. So the visuals and style of the movie are a touch off-putting and make it creepy in itself. The fact that it's almost like those ultra realistic latex masks, but certain proportions and things are off to just make it look a little creepy. So the whole movie on your first viewing is just a little off-putting from the
It's
beginning.
it's you guys can't see this right now because obviously this is an audio podcast, but anytime that Mark would say creepy or just eerie, like just now, like I just there's a big smile across my face. I loved how creepy this movie was. But you're right, it is like it's very off-putting. It's very like jarring to watch this because this entire thing feels like a fever dream. Like when someone's like talks about a movie being a fever dream, this is the type of thing that like
And it's
I
like
think
ultra
about.
violent on top of it.
Which was something that like really surprised me because like typically when you have movies that have this type of visual style, like you brought up Team America. Team America is a great idea, but everything that they do in terms of like, sex or violence, that stuff that's done for like shock value. And so it kind of like it's played for laughs. Whereas here it's played for like legitimate shocks. Like I think the first time you experience blood shock, it's just kind of just like you're just taken back by like how violent this movie can be.
Yeah, it's just like, what did I just watch? It's like, did that really just happen?
There's like a movie, like there's a scene in the movie where the main character, his name's Les, and he's basically told to break into a suburban house and kill the family. And you don't expect it to be as violent as it is, but man, it is gory. Like this movie might have some of the best and most gnarly deaths that I've seen in the genre this year.
Was it the giant fan that they
Yeah.
were throwing people into?
Yeah. Oh man.
It's
Yeah.
yeah, it's a just I wouldn't even know how to score this one because I still don't know exactly what I thought of it.
That is 100% fair. I will go ahead and I will agree with the majority of critics that have reviewed this movie on Rotten Tomatoes, where it sits at an 86%, and I will go 4.5 out of 5. I think this movie is one of the most unique films I've seen this year. It has boldness and tap. I genuinely thought this movie was just an absolute 100% great time.
Oy. And now we go from murder puppets to musicals.
We do. Uh, Eldritch-usa is our next one, and
So
Eldridge.
that's
Go ahead.
simply because I'm a fan of anything Lovecraft. I'll check it out at least once. But nowhere did I read that this was a musical. So it's not my fault.
Yeah, so when I talked about earlier, Mark established in our Sweeney Todd episode, he's not a fan of musicals at all. And this movie basically tells the story of like two brothers that work together that kind of rivals, and basically one kills the other one and then
By
uses uses it to kind of create like this Lovecraftian resurrection, and
With a hillbilly cult.
and then it's a musical.
Yes.
Like this out of all the movies on this list, this is the one that I was most excited to talk to you about because I know how much you hate musicals.
And the funny thing was, because of how cheesy and goofy this one was, I actually thought it was kind of funny.
Oh,
Man.
It
didn't annoy me. It didn't annoy me as bad as you thought it would.
I watched this movie before you, and I had texted you after the first 15 minutes. I hit pause and I texted you and I was like, I don't know if you know this or not, but this is a musical. And I'm only 15 minutes into this movie, and there has been 2 musical numbers already.
Did you notice how badly and out of time the choreographed dancing was? Nobody was on the same beat.
No, there's so much about this movie that like just drove me crazy, absolutely bonkers. I think this might be my least favorite movie of this bunch.
Really?
Really.
When I heard
I
it was
love
a musical,
musicals.
When I heard it was a musical, I was thinking it was going to be my most hated one on the list, but it wasn't. It was actually kind of entertaining and cheesy.
This one is also the longest movie in this bunch. And
it's like an hour and 45 minutes or something like that. Hour 50 minutes.
Yeah, I felt every ounce of that. Like, don't get me wrong, there are definitely times where I was laughing. I was, having an okay time. It's not the worst movie I've seen this year. It by far won't be the worst. It's probably the worst of this bunch. But yeah, this movie to me just kind of felt really bloated. It felt bland. I really would have liked to, Mark, you and I grew up during different time periods, and this reminded me of like the sibling rivalry in this movie reminded me of like things I grew up on with like Disney Channel and Nickelodeon shows.
I mean,
So
I
found it predictable.
But well, yeah, it was kind of given what was going to happen. They established that in the first 5 minutes. That's like any movie. But it was so cheesy that it kind of made it fun.
Yeah, I didn't feel the same way. Like, I think one of the other things that like really bothered me was that the character designs of the resurrected individuals were never consistent. I don't know if you caught that, but
there was nothing consistent in the whole movie.
There wasn't. But like the visual aspect caught me because like if a shot was really bright, the paleness was like bright blue. But if it was like a darker like scene for the resurrected, it was like a very muted gray, and it felt like so inconsistent throughout the entire film.
I don't know. That's kind of what made it amusing, the inconsistency.
Not to me. Not to me.
Like like the
I
dancing numbers where everybody was on like different times trying to dance the same dance, or they would just stop and look at each other while three other people were dancing. Like, what are we doing? It's the inconsistency was part of what made it funny.
and I don't want to like feel like because of what I talked about earlier with like liking richer stories that I don't love this. I mean, go back and listen to our Frankenhooker episode. I love cheesy horror. I absolutely like adore that subgenre. I just could not get into this. Like these characters annoyed me. Like I think I would have liked this movie had it been like 80 minutes. I felt like it was too long and it was like it's too bland for me.
I mean, there's a couple movies on the list that were like 80 minutes, and I still felt like they were too long. Uh, so,
That's fine. That's how I felt about this one. But this one was almost 2 hours
yes,
and
yeah, it was pretty
like
long.
it just it didn't need to be that long. Like there are like like I guess one of my other gripes with this movie is they established that there's clearly like a rivalry. Like the good looking brother is, I guess I'm not gonna say good looking. I'm actually gonna call them by their names. But so Jeff and Rick, I don't remember which one was which. Um, all right. So Big Brother like kind of has the oh, it's right here.
It's
Hold on.
basically one brother keeps taking everything the other brother wants.
Yeah, so Rich is kind of like the ladies' man. He's the guy that like is, really successful, really beloved by everybody, whereas Jeff is trying to consistently get out of his brother's shadow the entire film. I think to me, like what would have made this movie better is like the tightening of the narrative where like I didn't need the flashbacks. Like there's like three flashbacks that establish the same thing. And I'm like, why are we watching this? This just seems so pointless. It's not bringing anything to the narrative.
Oh, it is, but it's not at the same time. It's some of the stuff that could have been pulled. Just shorten it up by about 15 minutes.
I think I would not have been so harsh had they decided to do that. I will say, uh, despite even some of my complaints about this movie, um, Jeff's friend with the awesome mustache, whose name I can't remember, was the best character in this movie.
And his
Dude,
date with his mom.
like there were so many times that like he would say something that would just crack me up to the point where like I was almost crying. Like he was the best part of the movie for me.
He would, yeah. He's that dumb friend that would do just about anything, whether it's on a dare or serious. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, and I liked that aspect because I felt like he was one of the stronger elements in this. I will say though, I am a musical guy and I did like the musical numbers. Like the musical numbers definitely got stuck in my head a couple of days after watching this movie. I thought they were pretty good, but overall, this movie was just kind of okay.
I mean, the cheesiness made it kind of fun. So I kind of
All right.
liked it a little bit.
All right. So and I'm not shaming you or anyone else that liked this movie. This movie just didn't resonate for me. So what would this movie land on your Rorschach rating scale?
Oh, 3.5. And that's
Three and a
because
half.
it was fun.
I just was not expecting that. Okay. Uh I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna go a little bit lower and say 1.5 size.
Dude, you're being harsh today.
I wait till we get to the next one.
What's the next one?
Next one is Agatha.
Agatha.
This is the shortest film on our list. It is also
It was an experimental film.
it is a very experimental film. So I'm basically just gonna read the synopsis off of Letterbox. It says, quote, hoping to find a cure to his sickness, the quote unquote professor follows Agatha on a strange and risky journey into a forgotten but not entirely deserted urban wasteland. Um, this is a movie that had like next to no dialogue in this movie whatsoever. Mark is absolutely correct. Like this movie
Still here.
was 100% experimental.
Yeah, it's so probably okay. Let me sit down for just a second. The dog just knocked over a glass of water. I can get it in a minute. Uh, uh, so I think part of why I thought it was interesting and kind of cool was the fact that it had a very Silent Hill feel to it. And I've played like all the Silent Hills. I like the Silent Hills better than Resident Evil. It's just Resident Evil got popular and Silent Hill didn't. Silent Hill got the cult following now, but it had that feeling to the whole movie in the way, kind of the way some of the scenery and the atmosphere of it was, and the way it played out, kind of just had that feel to it.
I think for me, there was a Grant Morrison novel that was released in the late 80s called Arkham Asylum. Uh, and I can't remember, like, it has like a sub, I think it's like Mad Place for a Mad Planet or something like that. I can't remember what the subtitle of it is called. But it reminded me of that art style. It's very experimental. This is a very immersive experience. Um, and I think that's where it's really strong. I think the visuals of this really work. Um, what the storytelling aspect I just don't think is here.
Is that because of the lack of dialogue?
It is not because of lack of dialogue. It's just I don't know. Like everything like the synopsis that I just read, I probably would not have been able to draw that out from just watching it once. I think this movie's kind of like the way this movie for me was kind of like the way that Abruptio was for you, or Abrupto was for you, the where it is not a movie that you just watch once and critique it. I think this movie kind of warrants a couple rewatches, but like just having watched it the once for this podcast, I think the this is a case of style over substance. And I think that I could probably feel different uh if I watched it like maybe once or twice more, but like just having watched it once, like it's a beautiful movie, but it's nothing past its beauty.
Or is it one of those movies that may take some extracurricular substances to appreciate a little better?
I definitely might. Um
I'm not
and
promoting that. I'm just saying.
no, and like I will also say this that my favorite director is David Lynch. David Lynch is a very divisive director. You either love him or you hate him. But when you get into some of his short films, especially early in his career, they feel a lot like Agatha visually and narratively. And they're as much as I love Lynch, they're probably the weakest part of his filmography, in my opinion. But I feel like this movie probably, much like you said with Sorry Charlie, could have benefited from just being a short film. Like this entire story could have been condensed to literally like 8 to 10 minutes.
Hmm. I enjoyed the art style. Like I said, it reminded me of Silent Hill and the way it was presented.
I absolutely enjoy this art style, and I think this movie is one that you can play background and turn your brain off, but it's not a movie that I think works as a like legitimate narrative and like telling of its story. Like, do you think that the narrative works past the visual style?
I don't know. Maybe not.
See, I think this is like a visually stunning film. I think this is right up there visually where it is with Abruptio. I think it works as that really unique, just absolutely breathtaking visual foundation, but it doesn't really have anything to offer those.
Outside of it, it's more
Yeah,
style over substance, is what you're saying.
that is exactly what I'm saying.
I mean, why didn't you just say that?
I I I said that like 5 minutes ago. I said this is the very definition of style over substance.
No, you didn't.
I did. I promise you. So where would this land for you on on ratings?
Um, Kind of in the middle of my list. I like the style of it. Like I said, this style reminds me of one of my favorite game series. So, I mean, I might 2.5, 3, somewhere in that area.
I I'm gonna go for a two. And I think for me the reason I landed at two is I think this has a really strong foundation and could have been something, excuse me. This has a really
Okay.
strong foundation and could have been something really remarkable, but it just kind of really stayed to its guns.
How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression, and to get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.
Yeah, it's almost like they took a cartoon and tried to put a story over a concept as opposed to building the concept around the story.
I think also too, this is going to be a really divisive film. I think this is going to really resonate for people that are very much into like painting and that create their own art. But I think for us that critique said art, it doesn't really resonate. I feel like this is kind of a movie made for a very specific audience, of which I do not feel like I am a part of.
And that just may be the case. Some movies aren't for everybody.
That is very true. All right.
What do we have now?
Next
Ghost
we
of the
have
Void.
Ghosts of the Void. Yes.
So
Go
I
ahead.
saw the trailer for this one, and it seemed like it was your kind of movie. Then
Find out.
I watched the trailer, and unfortunately, the parts of the movie that I thought were going to be good were all in the trailer. And it was painful to watch. And
Let's jump.
there were far too many unneeded flashbacks. I hated this movie.
Let's
It
jump into
sucked.
the narrative real quick. So this movie tells the story of a couple that has recently been evicted from their home and essentially are crashing in their car and are faced with the unknown terror of uh kind of just like villains that would be akin to people you would find into like the home invasion genre or a slasher.
It's
So
a friggin' ambient delusion.
okay, that's fair. Yeah. So did you spoil the ending of this movie?
No,
Okay. Uh, this movie, I'm right there with you. Like I hated this movie. And
it really seemed like one that was going to be up your alley, but it was a poor portrayal of a drunk. Very poor portrayal of a drunk, especially a writer that's also a drunk. Um, yeah, it's the characters weren't really likable. I mean,
well, there's so much about this movie. So like the bulk of this movie, I feel like is really underwhelming. There's no need at all for the flashbacks. Like there are quite a few in here, and you literally don't need them because like this movie, I feel like force feeds its audience everything.
yeah,
Like, why?
yeah, it's. And I said this about the new Batman movie. It seemed like they had three ideas for a Batman movie, but didn't know how to do certain parts, so they just stuck them all together. This felt like two different movies that they didn't know how to complete the other one, so they just stuck them together.
Yeah, then like the quote unquote like twist at the end. I was kind of like, why? Like this movie felt like just taking like a just a big thing of salt, cutting yourself open and pouring it in. Like it was so unbearable to watch this movie. Like you said, like I think this is probably the one that I agree with you most on this list that we've covered so far. That
Yeah, this might be the worst out of all of them.
yeah. So I will say from like a technical aspect, the the cinematography is really good, and I will even say that the performances are okay. But I think the cinematography is the biggest strength of this movie, and
And that's about all it had going for it.
yeah, it's this one of these things that man, like I really wanted this to. I liked how it. I'm tripping over my words. There's a point in the movie where you think that this is going to be kind of like a new spin on the home invasion genre, just like it's in a car, and it never squandered. It's basically two unhappy people in a relationship yelling at each other for an hour and a half.
And it never gets any better.
No, like even like the ending, I was like, why? Like it's never explained. Like the ending to this movie is just never it's just
If
never explained.
if you've ever sat in a room and watched like your parents argue, there was probably more entertainment value to that. And it's the same concept in this movie.
Yeah, I think I talked earlier about like movies on this list having potential. Like I talked about Puzzle Box, like having potential, but never like really raising to that potential. Like this movie could have been great. This movie could have been one of 2023's like hidden gems. And like you said, like it's just a movie that it's basically two bitter people yelling at each other about why they're bitter.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, so Rorschach ratings time. What would you
One.
give this one? One.
One. It sucked. It was horrible.
So you can if you feel that way, you can do half stars. You know,
I
you can go
can.
point. Yeah, you can go 0.5.
Yeah, let's go 0.5. Do not recommend.
Right there with you. This is while I did have problems with some of the movies on this list, this was by far the worst. And this one falls beneath Eldridge USA for me because I feel like Eldridge at least had some semblance of entertainment to it, as annoying as it was.
This, yeah. Whoever made this, I'll stop.
All right.
Because the bad thing is when we're done, we post this and we have to tag them, and they're gonna hear us just trash shit out of this movie. And yeah, we won't get invited back. That's my fear.
Well, we're talking about the movies of a film festival, not you'll get invited back to the film festival, just not to, work with those. Anyways, moving on to our next movie is ironically called The Last Movie Ever Made, even though it will not be the last movie we talk about on this episode. This movie tells the story of a man who basically gathers up a bunch of friends to make a film in the face of Armageddon while uh, time on Earth slowly counts down to the doomsday clock. What did you think about this movie?
It had a funny concept, especially when they're like, we know we're giving you this message that the world's going to end in 30 days on April 1st. So just so you take us seriously, the moon is going to be green for the next month. So it had some interesting comedic value to it. It had its entertaining points. It wasn't my favorite, but it still had some interesting and funny points to it.
This was my second favorite film of this festival.
I
thought this movie was an absolute delight. Like, this movie is really lighthearted, it's really fluffy, but yet it also has a lot of those depths. And I love movies that revolve around the subject of filmmaking as a nerd anyways. So this movie kind of reminded me of Be Kind, Rewind, if you've ever seen that.
They make like an old style Flash Gordon. But my issue the whole time with me being me and the way that I am, if I got a 30-day notice that the world's going to end in 30 days, I feel like it would turn into The Purge, not into like hippie land.
That is all right. So, like, just for context of what you're talking about, so the main character, like, he makes movies, like him and his friends made movies in high school. They had one that was very similar in tone to Flash Gordon that they never finished, and this was the movie they were going to finish in the wake of Armageddon. And I think that's what really made me really love this movie, was the fact that it was this very lighthearted thing. It kind of showcased the power of like nostalgia and how it brings us together and how it can be a safe haven for our mental health in the vein of something as dark and as depressing as the world coming to an end. I think this is why this movie shines and really resonated with me the way that it did.
I don't know. I just had the overwhelming feeling the entire time. It's like, this is unrealistic.
I think that's the brilliance of it, is that it doesn't necessarily need to be realistic, is the fact that this is a movie that is about escapism and feels like escapism.
Yeah. I mean, the story's there. Don't get me wrong. Like I said, it had its parts that were funny and entertaining. It's just, I couldn't help getting past that idea. That was my issue. That it's like,
that sounds like a Mark problem and not a Last Movie Ever Made problem.
I mean, we watched movies that have been your problem too. So
that is and we've talked about them on this episode. Very prominent.
So I will keep my me problem. Kiss my ass.
That's fine. I also really liked I think one of the things that really resonated with me is that I kind of related to the main character in this movie. Marshall was played wonderfully by Adam Rennie, and like one of the reasons that I am a cinephile and that I love cinema so much is because my grandmother was diagnosed with cancer when I was younger, and movies were the thing that kind of became an escape for me. And it's kind of what this entire filmmaking journey feels like for these characters. It feels like an escape. And I love the fact that this is a heartwarming narrative, but also at the same time, like there's an expression of joy that this movie brings. And it feels like this feels incredibly like the black sheep of these entire list because this was the movie that I literally watched with like big smiles, warm feelings, and was just absolutely enthralled by. And not to say
It's
that
a
there are
it's
anything
a
else in this list, but
it's a
God,
story about finding peace in the end is really what it comes to be about.
which I think also too, especially in like the divisive times that we live in, and like us being, a beacon of hope to talk about mental health and how horror kind of intersects there. I think this movie is well done in that manner. I think this is probably one of those movies that, again, I thought was really well done. I laughed throughout the whole course of it. I I probably could have teared up if I wasn't watching this while I was also simultaneously working. Um, but yeah, this movie hit me in the feels, man.
It was okay. It wasn't my favorite on the list, but it wasn't my least favorite either. It was just okay.
And I can't say anything yet, but this will not be the last time that you hear the names victims and villains and the last movie ever made in the same sentence again. I can't say anything else. Make sure you
No,
follow us on social for that.
no.
I'll tell you after we get off here, but what do you give this movie on the rating scale?
A 2.5.
This
It
movie's a
wasn't
this movie
great. It wasn't great. It wasn't horrible. So yeah, 2.5.
this movie's a solid 4 without
Uh,
question. I
oh, I'll question.
I loved this movie, man. I had so much fun with it. I thought it was just an absolute gem and delight. Um, this is just, but I also feel like I have a tolerance. I have the not tolerance. I is probably the bad wrong word. I have I probably watch more movies like this than you do. So this probably also comes down to preference again.
Probably is what it comes. That's probably a safe bet. I
Because I
mean, I prefer my
this was
end day movies to be more like Mad Max or The Purge.
I I also loved how like this movie opens up on like the entire civilization finding out that they're in a simulation, and like have you ever questioned whether or not life is a simulation? Because I'm like this movie like validated that for me.
Why does that not surprise me with you?
I was like, what if we really are in a simulation and God's just up in heaven with Jesus and they're just kind of playing video games and like this entire thing is just like an Xbox or a PlayStation game.
I mean, I prefer the alternate universe theories.
That too.
That there could be some universe where I'm the guy that started the podcast, not you.
You think so? Anyways, our last movie of this one is called Popcorn Frights is called Watchdog, and it tells the story about a man who tricks another dude and his wife, um, basically into robbing them and holding them hostage. Um, is that about sum it up for this movie?
Kind of. And it's a borderline slasher.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on this movie?
It suffers from being a little bit too wordy and characters that don't quite fit the parts.
That is very well spoken. I thought much like Ghost of the Void, I felt like this movie looked really good and was really lackluster. This movie was really boring to watch. Like this movie is a home invasion slasher hybrid, but you're right. Like there are some characters that don't feel like they fit here. This is probably one of the more predictable movies on this list. I will say it is nice to see Mark Patton back on the screen, though. Mark
Uh,
Patton plays the father in this movie. He was Jesse from A Nightmare on Elm Street 2. And speaking of delights, I met him and interviewed him a couple years ago, and he is probably one of the nicest human beings I've ever met doing this podcast.
he was one of the characters I didn't think fit his part.
He didn't. I'll give you that. Like he definitely goes up against hype because I've only ever seen him in this movie, Scream Queen, and Nightmare on Elm Street 2. And he's always kind of played the more feminine roles, like feminine male roles. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. To me, I feel
His character felt like if you took RuPaul and tried to make him be the aggressive, intimidating rich father.
I felt like all right, so like when he's introduced into the movie, it's during a dream sequence. And I felt like it worked during the dream sequence because you could get away with that. But it didn't really feel like it. Like, and I think this movie could have been more successful with his character in particular had they like given him a larger part because he's introduced really aggressive in like the first half of the movie and then he's kind of downplayed as I feel like I can't talk about it without
I
like
I didn't feel like he fit the aggressive and intimidating nature of the character he was trying to play.
see I agree with you but I don't like I understand where you're coming from. I think I love it when actors play against like what they're known for. And I won't say that he's like kind of like a mixed bag. It depends on like the scene that he's in. Like there are some scenes I think he does really well in. There are some scenes that I feel like he does he's kind of okay. And then that's the same way that I felt for Alicia Rose. I felt, you know, she worked really well in some of the dream sequences, but she just kind of felt like an afterthought, and as did Patton. Like both of them kind of just feel like an afterthought. Really, I feel like you could have contained them to that one dream sequence, and this movie would have been fine. Or
Yeah,
their portion, their contributions to the movie would have been fine.
I mean, but out of all the movies we've watched, there's not really a perfect one.
There's not, but like my thing is like I know you haven't seen it, but like Terrifier 2, like Felicia Rose is in that, and she's in it for like a cameo, and that's the thing. Like she's in it for like a scene, and I think that both of them being in this movie could have been fine for a scene. That's it.
But not the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
he didn't make a believable character for me. He just didn't seem to fit the attitude that they were trying to put forth with his character. And that was my issue with him.
I think a larger scale of that was Wes Robinson plays the lead character Drew. There's a scene where he's confining in our antagonist Travis, played by Channing Morrow, Um, and Robinson, like they give him an arc, but he never quite feels right for that arc. Like I feel like if there's anyone that feels out of character in this movie, it's Robinson. Like
Which one was Robinson?
Robinson was the boyfriend.
The boyfriend. Okay. I don't know. I thought he kind of fit his role. That's what's funny. I thought he fit his role and was fine. I do agree that the parents, the girlfriend's parents, should have had a lot smaller role in the movie than they did. It almost felt like a time grab, like they wanted the movie a little bit longer than it was clocking in as.
Yeah.
So they had to throw something else in there.
I'm sorry. Robinson was the antagonist. I got them mixed up. I thought he did a good job, but Morrow was the guy that was um
The boyfriend.
the boyfriend. He
Yeah.
he was okay in this movie. I don't want to say I never like believed him. Like his performance just kind of felt wooden to me. Um, so it never kind of quite leaped off the way that you would expect him to, because I feel like when you have Robinson, I felt like put in and made a compelling villain. I think he's one of the stronger elements in this movie. He's really aggressive, and I think you need somebody that's going to be on par with your villain if you're going to have an overall compelling story. Because if you don't, at that point, what you're presenting an audience is a movie that is only meaningful when you have the bad guy on the screen.
Well, I think the point was that they were trying to show him progress from basically being a pansy into someone able to fight back.
Yeah,
And yeah, that's what they
yeah.
were trying to do with him. But I don't know. I didn't think he did bad. He wasn't the best, but he didn't do bad either. But I
It's
kind of
just
felt
okay.
that way about a lot of the characters in the movie. It had a concept of a decent movie. We've seen similar movies with the concept. Um, and it's just, it
I
didn't do
think,
anything original.
yeah, I think what gets me about this movie is it is. I wrote in my notes that this movie was aggressively predictable, so I felt like I knew everything that was going to happen before it did. And I know that, I talked earlier this podcast about trying to really turn off my expectations, especially when you're covering films in this vein. But one of the things that I felt like just really hit it was, man, like this movie, like the home invasion is really hard to do and break new ground on, because it's a simple concept of person A breaks into person B's house, some violence go down. It's really hard to kind of be original in that aspect. But I feel like this movie just kind of was like a real paint by numbers um story, like through
But
and through.
it's that, I mean, with that, a vast majority of the movies we're getting these days are paint by numbers. Change the cast, change the location. They're all essentially the same movie. We love Evil Dead, and there's
Yeah.
no such thing as a bad Evil Dead, but they are paint by numbers. Every one is essentially exactly the same, with the
I,
exception of Army of Darkness.
yeah, and I mean, like, the thing about that is like, and to your point, like I think that there are a lot of horror genres, and I think my thing about these like different subgenres is that I don't necessarily need something that like reinvents the wheel every time I see a slasher or a home invasion or a supernatural thriller. Like I want
But
something that
it needs to
feels,
be entertaining, though.
it needs to be entertaining, and it needs to feel like some semblance of it can stand on its own legs again. And I'm gonna finalize and say it that I think probably like the seeing Patton in this role was kind of a different, it was different for him. And I didn't necessarily feel the same way that you did. I know I talked about it earlier, but now kind of sitting on it, like I think Patton is one of the stronger elements in this movie because it is showing some semblance of boldness of trying to do something new. Because I feel like this movie just takes different ideas from every other movies that done stories like this and just repackages them. And it feels not entertaining, completely boring. This movie is beautiful to look at, but it has nothing really to offer.
I mean, I'm still waiting on the trend of having the bad guy win. I'm at that age where I cheer for Michael Myers and Jason and Freddy. That's what I'm looking forward to.
Way to ruin the ending.
What? You already did. You said it was predictable.
I know, but I didn't say the bad guy loses. Now I
You
gotta
s-
edit that out.
oh,
It's fine.
damn it, get off my lawn.
I think there are very few redeeming factors to this point, but what would you give this movie rating wise?
A 2.5 out of 5. It's okay. It's not great or groundbreaking. It's just okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna go a little lower and do a 2 out of 5. Like you said, like I think this movie it's it's okay. It doesn't break any new grounds. There are a few things about it that I liked, but overall this movie's on the lower end of uh home invasion movies that I've seen.
But yeah, it is hard to do a good home invasion these days, especially when your audience has probably seen most of them.
Yeah, not to compare it to others, but not everyone can be the strangers.
Or what was the other one? Hush.
Hush.
That was
Yeah.
pretty good.
So, all right. Well, I think that's going to do it for us on this episode, but make sure that
So
you guys go ahead.
as a whole, though, we had a lot of movies that we thought were mediocre or we weren't fond of. But as a whole, it's a cool experience to be able to review some of these festivals and take on some of these movies that a lot of times how many of these movies like never see major release or years later come out on like on demand or something. So
This is
it's kind of cool that we get to review stuff like this.
Yeah, and this is why I love to support independent film is because, you know, I may have not liked every film on here like you know, Eldritch-usa or like Agatha, but there are things about them that I still really admire, still really respect. I can say a lot of positive things about a lot of these movies. And this is the reason why we need to keep supporting independent cinema, is so that movies like, Watchdog and the last movie ever made, or Abruptio, or however you say it keep getting made because, at the end of the day, like I love watching movies that are independent. That's why I love platforms like Screenbox and Shutter, is that and Tubi, they're bringing those right to the comfort, but being able to sit and experience this popcorn frights depending on, which side we landed on. Like I think had a really solid selection of films this year.
And there's still a lot that we didn't just time restraints didn't get to
There's
review.
so much. I think this is one of the largest festivals we've ever reviewed outside of Fantasia, because Fantasia, and like, so we've covered Fantasia and I've done Sundance, and both of those go for like 2.5, like sometimes 3 weeks. And
This
like,
one was 10 days, but it
yeah,
was like 20 or 30 films. Like I
yeah,
have it pulled up now, and if we had had time, I'd love to have pulled like Bloody Bridget or Beaten to Death. Um, there were quite a few other movies. I would Kindling. There's quite a few of them I would like to have gotten. That it wasn't for not asking; it was just for lack of time.
yeah. Yeah, that's kind of the tough thing about doing stuff like this is that like for us, like this is still like this isn't a full-time job. This is like still a hobby for us. Um, but one day you can support victims and villains right now. Support us on Patreon, but where can people you guys can also I will also say this. You guys can follow Popcorn Frights on all social media. Where can people find you online though?
I actually started posting painting stuff again the other day. Um, Titanium Juggernaut painting on Instagram. Yay.
Make sure you guys go follow and check it out. Uh, you guys can follow me. Um I am on Letterboxd at Captain Nostalgia. You guys can follow us uh wherever you guys get your podcast from. Just search Abyss Gazing, and you guys can also find our um oh, you guys can follow our parent company, Victims and Villains. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, and wherever you guys get your podcast from. Just search Victims and Villains. And until next time, remember, the longer you gaze into the abyss, the more the abyss gazes into you.